Well, my thanks to you for being part of my dream realized. I never could have imagined myself in this place at this time talking to people about a life that I have been privileged to live. Everything that's happened to me, I consider a gift. So when you hear, which I will tell you in just a minute, how I started, where I started from, and then realize where I am today, you too will say, never in my wildest dreams. But I basically am a Southern girl. I wasn't part of the Great Migration. We got there a couple of minutes before that started. I was born in Monroe, Louisiana, and that is the northern part of Louisiana. It doesn't even have the romance of being, New Orleans and all of those customs. But I was born in 1932, and you can do the math, in this town right after what they call the flood of the century on the Ouachita River. My mother was 15 years old when I was born. She worked as a laundress. I was soon, as families do in the South, uh, given the label of being a farmed out kid. The first farming out, though, was the best part of my young life. I was given to my mother's middle sister. I went to live with her. She was a childless woman who wanted a baby very badly. So I was very, very spoiled up to the time that I was about 3.5 years old. After that, the world changed. She had tuberculosis and died for a child suddenly, but obviously there must have been signs, but I didn't know about it. And I was fortunate enough to be sent to the home where my mother and father lived, except also in the Southern style. It was a very crowded facility, I call it that, because people came from the country when they got a job, went back when they didn't have one. They came from Mississippi or wherever they were living, and we all sort of bunked in together. Remember, these were the Depression years. What I was given was what a lot of small children were given back in those days. There were no bedrooms for all of us, so I had what was called a pallet, which was my very own. It was blankets that are put together, and you sleep on them at night and you roll them up during the day. And it made it very easy when I was being transferred from one relative to the other, because I had very few things to pack up and luggage to take with me, if that. I don't think I remember my first suitcase, though, till I was on the train to California. So that's how I started. So by the time we were ready to migrate to California, I had lived in 7 different homes by then, all of them homes of relatives, all of them people who were doing the best they could by a little girl that was quiet, withdrawn, and constantly trying to find ways to please so that maybe somebody would keep me permanently. And that did not happen. We ran into not traditional, but something that probably has happened to many Southern blacks. My uncle, the brave guy that he was, worked for a meatpacking company. He experienced an accident, a serious one. One of my aunts, one of the households where my aunts worked, there was a young white lawyer who heard of my uncle's permanent injuries and filed a lawsuit on my uncle's behalf. We thought nothing of it except that there was a real buzz as to why a black man would ever think he could file a lawsuit against a major company in the South and get away with it. But soon we found that through some miracle, a judge somewhere ruled in my uncle's favor. And we had about 10 minutes, I watched the adults rejoice. And then soon that evening, the young lawyer came to let my family know that the decision had been made by some in the community that he should be tarred and feathered, and that in the Southern tradition it would be best if all the men left the South. And so the plan started that evening to, as quickly as possible, get the adult men out of our house. Most of them went by automobile. My uncle went on a freight train, and that's how we preceded the Great Migration, but only so slightly. It was a while, as also custom, before the women left. and then an even longer while before the children left, at least my brother and I. So we were sent off to Arkansas to live with a grandfather, and that's where we stayed until my father came for me. I felt all of my life that my brother was the favorite because he was the baby that got to stay home. So that was the way we came to California. I would say to my brother, I'm so glad that Daddy loves you because then I get to go with you. And so that was my thought of my importance in that circle. So you can see why I would write a book that says never in my wildest dreams. Expectations were not high as to what I would become. But I think all of those shifting around, moving from place to place, gaining knowledge from relative to relative as to what makes for a good person, learning that dedication to work, and honesty, that's the one thing my Aunt Pearline could not stand. She just hated a liar, she said. So, and I lived with her through much of my life. So we moved to California, and I thought this was going to be it. This is going to be, this is peaches and honey and all of the good things. But as would happen by then, there was a war, and we were living in a basement apartment, like many others, sharing these facilities, and there were 11 of us in this 2-bedroom basement apartment. But we made it, they made it, they all ended up getting their own homes, and eventually I went with my aunt and her husband to live in one of the brand new housing projects, and oh boy, were we glad to get it. And for a quick minute, I had my own bedroom. That was something. And as life would have it, soon after, my uncle's brother and his 6 children arrived, and life changed again. So I was very accustomed to change, so it's nothing for me to get used to the pace of being a journalist where there's constant change and constant moving around, because you learn to adapt to whatever it is. And life for me continued along a path that could have been predicted. I did well in high school. I passed my SAT scores very high. And I forgot one thing. I forgot about money. And I didn't have anyone in my family who'd ever gone to college. So by the time I realized I needed $300 to go to college, it was too late for scholarships, and no one in my family had the money. So I went to work. Soon after was married. Soon after that, I had 2 children and started a different life until one day I grew up. And when I grew up, it was because I read so much, that I knew so much from reading, and I loved reading, and I attempted writing. Certainly it was of the caliber that in those days, if you got a magazine and there was a little writing contest in there, you could send it off. And, I don't think that anybody ever answered, but it was a great opportunity for me to pretend to be a writer. And life then took a funny twist. I started to try to help women in our community, and the black middle-class women were just realizing they had a place in the nonprofit world with various charities. So I started writing little cut lines for photographs that would go in the black newspapers to talk about working for the March of Dimes or whatever it was, and started to work with a photographer named Chuck Willis. His darkroom man was Bill Moore, the man I've been married to for 46 years. So that was so what started out as trying to help others turned into a real winning proposition for me. And that work led to my first paid job, if you want to call it that, was for Jet Magazine as a stringer. I got $5 a week, and that was because the Bay Bridge toll was 25 cents. And so that was to cover getting to San Francisco to cover events. And from that, I got a job working for a black weekly newspaper. And that's where I learned a lot. My editor was a former AP reporter who'd spent 18 years in the Far East. He just had a problem with too many drinks. And finally, after 18 years, AP sent him home. And no one would hire him but the owner of a black weekly newspaper. And I was his only staff member. So I learned to do everything, write headlines, pick up the copy, pick up the Safeway ads, bring back the proof sheets, whatever it took to get that little newspaper published.